Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit is an attraction that Universal Destinations and Experiences regrets purchasing. The problematic roller coaster is located at Universal Studios Florida, a part of the Universal Orlando Resort. It's a high-profile destination that attracts millions of tourists annually. It boasts a long list of attractions that are celebrated for their excellence. However, among its standout offerings, Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit is often regarded as one of the resort's worst attractions. Not only is it rough and jarring, it also suffers from frequent operational issues and design flaws, making it incredibly expensive to maintain and operate. In this video, we'll thoroughly explore the history and shortcomings of the notorious Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit. However, I must emphasize that even with its shortcomings, Rip Ride Rockit has always been and will continue to be a safe roller coaster. While I personally appreciate the ride's dynamic nature, I do caution any viewers who have never experienced Rockit to brace themselves for a rather rough and uncomfortable experience. If you enjoy this video as it plays, I kindly ask for your support by clicking the like button, which greatly aids the channel in the continuous fight against the YouTube algorithm. Without further delay, let's delve into the intricacies of Rip Ride Rockit. Universal Studios Florida is the Universal Orlando Resort's inaugural theme park. Back in 1990, when Studios opened, there was no Universal Orlando Resort as we recognize it today. Instead, the property consisted merely of a surface-level parking lot alongside the Studios park. The landscape changed dramatically in 1999 with the debut of City Walk, the Portofino Bay Hotel, and the resort's second theme park, Universal's Islands of Adventure. Islands was never intended to directly rival the original Studios park. Rather, it was designed to complement it, encouraging guests to explore both parks, thereby extending their stay and increasing their spending within the Universal Orlando Resort. In reality, many visitors, myself included, consider Islands to be the superior park. So why did Studios fall behind? One pivotal moment occurred on May 31st, 2007, when Universal announced a groundbreaking partnership with Warner Brothers. This collaboration would see the introduction of the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at Islands, set to replace the Lost Continent area and become the world's first fully immersive Harry Potter themed environment, as well as the first theme park within a theme park. As we all know today, this bold move catapulted the Universal Orlando Resort into a new realm of success. But at the time, Universal Creative recognized the risk that Wizarding World would imbalance the two-park system, so they acted swiftly to elevate Studios as well. In 2008, Studios unveiled the Simpsons ride, a significant reimagining of the original Back to the Future attraction. Additionally, Earthquake the Big One underwent a transformation, reopening as Disaster, a major motion picture ride starring you. While these updates were welcomed, they fell short of competing with the allure of Wizarding World. Given that Studios lacked a large outdoor roller coaster like Island's Incredible Hulk and the now removed Dueling Dragons, Universal Creative chose to develop a competitive roller coaster for Studios that would stand apart from Island's offerings by not featuring any inversions. In January 2008, Universal Parks and Resorts filed a notice of commencement with Orange County, Florida, signaling their intent to construct a ride system dubbed Project Rumble. Surprisingly, the notice revealed that the ride's manufacturer would be Maurer X-Car, a German steel construction company that had also made a name for themselves in the amusement industry, primarily for building small-scale spinning wild mouse coasters. Ironically, Rip Ride Rockit is essentially a colossal wild mouse with bigger issues, but more on that later. Months prior to this revelation, rumors circulated suggesting that Project Rumble aimed to enhance the concept of Hollywood Dream the ride at Universal Studios Japan, which debuted in 2007. Hollywood Dream, a hypercoaster manufactured by Bolliger and Mabillard, or B&M, offered a comparable experience to larger-scale B&M hypers, just in a more confined space that traversed the narrow passages of Universal Studios Japan. While speculation abounded regarding Universal Creative's initial preference for a B&M hypercoaster in Orlando, what remains certain is their desire for Project Rumble to open before Wizarding World in 2009. As to the rest of the story, various rumors emerged. Some suggest that Universal approached B&M too late, or that B&M's production schedule was booked for years to come. Another theory proposes that B&M declined the project as they refused to work on two projects in the same region at the same time, and Manta at SeaWorld Orlando was already slated to open in 2009. Additionally, there are claims that B&M hesitated to work with Universal due to the park's year-round daily operation of the Incredible Hulk and presumably Dueling Dragons. B&M allegedly advocated provided for seasonal closures to facilitate thorough maintenance, contrasting with Universal's continuous operation model, which is common at both Universal and Disney parks in Orlando. For the Orlando parks, more rigorous maintenance is performed at nighttime between operating days. Contrary to the rumors, public statements from Louis Alfieri, Universal's creative director at the time, indicate a desire to significantly expand upon the Hollywood Dream concept rather than replicate it. In an interview with the Coaster Critic, Alfieri mentioned that him and his team had set out to create the most exciting non-inverting roller coaster in the world. He had previously worked on Japan's Hollywood Dream and for Rip Ride Rockit wanted to, quote, take every facet of that experience and take it vastly further. Universal Creative wanted to enhance the audio technology of Hollywood Dream while introducing interactive video technology as well as first-of-a-kind ride maneuvers. The X-Car coaster from Maurer was chosen for its vehicle capabilities, enabling the integration of various coaster styles into a non-inverting roller coaster at the scale of a hypercoaster, something that couldn't be done with longer trains. Alfieri's remark suggests a departure from the conventional B&M hypercoaster, which tend to be far from cutting edge. However, despite Alfieri's insights, the true intentions behind Universal's coaster selection process remain speculative. Personally, I believe the original intent for Rockit was a B&M hypercoaster just like Hollywood Dream, but one of the alleged rumors sent Universal shopping for a different manufacturer. Maurer introduced the X-Car in 2003 with the aim of bridging the gap between family and expensive thrill rides, offering dynamic layouts within a compact footprint. This was made possible by the maneuverability of the X-Car vehicles, which feature a small wheelbase, meaning there isn't much distance between the two axles of each car, along with short train lengths of 1, 2, or 3 cars, with Maurer's preference being trains just 1 car long. The prototype X-Car coaster, Skyline Wheel, debuted in 2004 at Skyline Park in Germany as part of Maurer's Skyloop package, with subsequent clones appearing at parks across the globe. Skyline Wheel utilizes 2 X-Cars connected by a long coupling rod. The trains feature Maurer's innovative X-seats with wide ergonomic lap bars capable of securing riders of all sizes, even when the train remains inverted for extended periods. Thus, the ride introduced Maurer's Humpty Bump lift tilt, a vertical lift followed by an inverted sky loop that leaves riders suspended upside down for several seconds. In 2005, G-Force at Drayton Manor became the first extended X-Car coaster, featuring a longer layout with compact ride elements that highlighted the X-Car's maneuverability even with a tandem train. In 2006, Maurer debuted an extended version of Skyline Wheel, Abismo at Parque de Atracciones de Madrid, boasting overbanked turns, an ejector airtime hill, and a double down, delivering a forceful and intense yet smooth ride experience. With a growing roster of unique X-Car coasters, Maurer's innovations caught the attention of Universal. The X-Car coaster's vertical lift capability and ability to navigate forceful elements within a confined space appealed to Universal's goal of creating the world's most exciting non-inverting roller coaster within the confined Orlando Studios park. On March 19, 2008, the Universal Orlando Resort officially announced Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit as the world's most technologically advanced roller coaster, combining audio and special effects engineering, sophisticated on and off-board video, and one-of-a-kind guest personalization to create a roller coaster experience like no other. It was scheduled to open in the spring of 2009, ahead of the planned late 2009 launch of Wizarding World. While the ride layout wasn't revealed yet, as the animation shown here did not release until shortly before the ride opened, the announced specifications included a height of 17 stories, a speed of 65 miles per hour, 6 near-miss moments, and innovative elements like a record-breaking loop. Construction commenced in May 2008 with land clearing, and vertical construction began much later, with the first track and supports being erected in December 2008. Over the next several months, the coaster rose higher and higher over the backdrop of studios. During construction, a few issues arose, such as providing the correct clearance envelope through the Ghostbusters firehouse facade, and in several locations, there were many unaligned track and support pieces. For example, the support on the third mid-course brake run did not align with the track piece above it. It appears the support had to be removed from the structure and re-welded at a new angle to fit the corresponding track piece. Construction would continue as track and supports reached as far as City Walk, and most of the ride had come together, except for the track of the lift hill, which interestingly was the last part of the ride to be installed. In April of 2009, Universal announced that Rockit's spring opening would be delayed until later that summer. According to Universal spokesman Tom Schroeder, the delay was attributed to the coaster being the most sophisticated roller coaster they had ever created, and it required more work to ensure an exceptional experience for guests. However, a major contributor to the ride's delay were undisclosed design and engineering issues. The poor manufacturing of the coaster led to delays as the construction crew handled the ride's many alignment issues. But another major delay for the coaster was caused by the lift hill. Rockit was intended to feature a dual chain lift on its vertical lift, similar to Fahrenheit at Hershey Park, where trains are lifted by two independent chain lifts for redundancy. Traditionally, roller coasters utilize a single chain lift with an anti-rollback system. The anti-rollback system creates the classic click-clack sound as trains ascend a lift hill, as pawls mounted beneath the train ride over the grooves of steel rack next to the chain. The pawls are able to roll forward over the rack but not backwards, which prevent trains from rolling back down the lift hill if the chain lift were to snap in half, for example. However, if the chain lift stops working, it leaves the train stopped in place. With two independent chain lifts, it means both chains serve as a redundancy in case one of the lift motors stopped working, or if one of the chains were to break. Not only would the other chain lift serve as the anti-rollback device, but also as a backup method of propulsion to prevent a train from remaining stuck on the lift hill in situations where one chain lift went out of order. We'll touch more on these benefits shortly, but strangely, when Rockit's lift track finally went vertical, it appeared to have only featured a single chain lift rather than two. And even crazier, the lift track did not even feature the industry standard anti-rollback system as you can see in this picture. Shockingly, public testing of the ride began on May 25th, 2009, with what seemed to be just the single chain lift and no anti-rollback system. Subsequently, construction crews began removing the lift track on June 4th, 2009, in order to retrofit the track with the necessary anti-rollback system. Then a few days later on June 10th, 2009, the updated lift track pieces began returning to the lift hill with anti-rollback racks freshly installed. Testing recommenced shortly afterward with a now audible anti-rollback system as trains ascended the lift hill. However, more problems quickly arose. One was that the ride was extremely sensitive to not having enough speed to ride up and into the first brake run following the non-inverting loop, and the other had to do with the new anti-rollback system. When the dual chain lift was abandoned, it must have meant that Rockit needed anti-rollback pawls to be added to its trains in order to interact with the teeth of the anti-rollback rack mounted to the track. However, the new anti-rollback pawls actually began striking cross ties of the track throughout the ride layout. So alongside the silencing of the anti-rollback system as trains ascended the lift hill, another system was put in place to lock the anti-rollback pawls in an upright position as each train disengaged the lift. But because Rockit is essentially cursed, this fix leads to other issues which we'll discuss later. Rockit continued testing throughout the summer as its anticipated opening date continued to be pushed back. Rumors circulated that during the lead up to the ride's opening, Universal fired Maurer from the project over the number of issues and finished the coaster themselves. Thankfully, Universal managed a soft opening of Rockit on August 15th, 2009, followed surprisingly by an official opening on August 19th, 2009. This swift official opening, considering the numerous issues still plaguing the coaster, is widely regarded as a mistake. During this time period, Rockit frequently opened late each day, sometimes as late as 6 p.m., and experienced frequent downtime when operational. And not only was Rockit already rough, which we'll discuss shortly, the ride could only operate at a fraction of its intended capacity. The ride's press release indicated plans for it to operate with 7 12-passenger trains, allowing a theoretical capacity of 1,850 riders per hour with a 23-second dispatch interval. This capacity was to be achieved through the ride's quick lift hill, continuously moving station, and strategically placed brake runs. However, upon its official opening, Rockit could only manage to operate with a maximum of 4 trains. Additionally, the continuously moving station was not utilized, with the ride adopting a start-stop mode for unloading and loading riders akin to traditional coasters. This change was attributed to timing issues as trains traverse different ride segments, and challenges with a newly implemented RFID tagging system used for dispatching trains into the lift hill. Although RFID tagging is now commonplace on many Universal attractions, Rockit was the first to introduce this technology. Ride attendants tap the back of each train with RFID pucks after checking restraints, signaling to the ride control system that that train is ready for dispatch, which allows the control system system to automatically pulse the train into the lift hill. However, at the time of Rockit's opening, the system was not fully operational. Ride attendants had to unload and load guests while trains were stationary, and signal the operator when ready for dispatch using traditional hand gestures. This, combined with fewer trains on the track, led to dispatch times ranging from 45 to 75 seconds, which was a sizable drop in capacity considering the high volume of visitors to one of the world's busiest theme parks. As previously mentioned, Rockit was rough from the moment it opened and continues to exhibit roughness to this day. Throughout the layout, Rockit's trains frequently jolt and shuffle, which is due to several factors. One is the increased weight of Rockit's trains compared to traditional Maurer X-Cars due to the incorporation of Maurer's multimedia seats. The multimedia seats feature taller backrests with built-in speakers and a camera. Along with that are the necessary equipment and capacitors that control and power the multimedia features built into the trains. As a result, the trains become top-heavy as the multimedia equipment is positioned above the heavy steel chassis that hugs the track. Additionally, Rockit's trains feature an unconventional coupling rod to connect the cars of each train. Unlike most high-end steel roller coasters that utilize ball connectors, which allow for a nearly endless degree of rotation both vertically and horizontally, Rockit's hitch design allows for only horizontal rotation at the front end and vertical rotation at the rear end. By separating vertical and horizontal pitch, it causes the cars to shunt and push against each other, which contributes to the ride's roughness. Furthermore, the short wheelbase of each X-Car makes them rather unstable, leading to unwanted oscillations and shaking. Unlike other 3-row steel coaster cars like Premier's Skyrocket 2 trains, the wheel assemblies on Maurer's X-Car are much closer together. While Premier's Skyrocket 2 trains feature an axle under row 1 and row 3, Maurer's X-Cars see an axle between rows 1 and 2 and another between rows 2 and 3. The short wheelbase also results in longer gaps between the wheel assemblies of each car, necessitating the use of the awkwardly long coupling rods. Moreover, the wheels of Rockit's trains do not sit flush against the running rails of the track, leaving slight gaps between the side guide wheels and bottom upstop wheels. You can even notice that much of the original white paint where wheels are meant to run on the rails is untouched, meaning wheels are not in contact with the rail at this location. These gaps allow the cars to move around, which accentuate the previously mentioned issues. Overall, the combination of these factors creates a never-ending chain reaction that makes the coaster as rough as it is. Another engineering oversight has to do with the placement of Rockit in an alleyway between the park sound stages. This means Rockit sits in a wind tunnel, and paired with Rockit's short 2-car trains, which are relatively light compared to the longer trains found on most major coasters of this size, it makes Rockit incredibly sensitive to wind. It's so bad that Rockit can only operate in winds as high as 25 miles per hour. For comparison, the former Top Thrill dragster at Cedar Point, which is 2.5 times taller than Rockit, could operate in winds up to 35 miles per hour. Depending on the direction of wind, it can easily cause Rockit to run too quickly or too slowly. When running too slowly, it's possible for trains to not have enough speed to make the ascent into the first brake run following the non-inverting loop. This causes the train to roll back towards the non-inverting loop, where it then valleys back and forth until coming to a stop. Rockit is most susceptible to valleying during morning test runs where trains are cycled around the course empty of riders, but that hasn't stopped it from valleying when trains were fully loaded with riders, such as in December of 2020 during the peak holiday season. This issue was first noticed during the ride's initial testing in 2009, and Universal have taken the necessary precautions to avoid valleying the ride as well as quickly recovering it if it does valley. The most aggressive but necessary approach was the development of a wind speed matrix, which dictates in what weather conditions Rockit can operate. Only when temperatures are warm enough can Rockit operate in winds up to 25 miles per hour. When the temperature gets colder, Rockit can only operate in winds up to 15 miles per hour, which is atrociously low for a major roller coaster. This causes the ride to be closed due to alleged high winds much more often than even taller roller coasters like Kingda Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure, the current world's tallest roller coaster. The park also has a mobile staircase that is kept near the non-inverting loop. Whenever a train valleys, the staircase can be rolled over to the stopped train, which allows park technicians to better respond to the stalled vehicle. It also helps in the rare scenarios when a train valleys with riders and passengers then need to be evacuated. To rescue stalled trains, a winch was installed at the top of the first brake run. Once winched back up to the first brake run, trains are able to complete the remainder of the circuit. As part of a training procedure and equipment check, Universal technicians actually force a train to valley in this location several times a year. This exercise ensures that technicians are trained to properly respond in this scenario, and also that the winch is still working properly. On the contrary, when Rockit runs too quickly, it's prone to experiencing overspeed faults as trains enter any of the ride's many brake runs at a faster than desired speed. When this occurs, that train is brought to a full stop in that location and the ride undergoes downtime until the fault is reset. Funny enough, the location where overspeeds are most likely to occur is the same location where the ride is most prone to valleying, the first brake run. It gets even worse when you consider that between the first drop and first brake run is just a single element, the non-inverting loop. Yet many coasters with far more track length and ride elements between control points such as a brake run are much less sensitive to running too quickly or slowly in a variety of weather conditions. To combat trains that are running too quickly, the operations team at Rockit will actually download trains. This means they'll purposely not load certain seats on the train, usually the back row, to make that specific train lighter. I say specific train as it's quite common for just a few of the trains to run too quickly while the rest do not. It's chaotic. Going back to the progression of Rockit, the station continued operating in start-stop mode until January 28, 2010, when the continuously moving station and conveyor belt were finally utilized. This allowed for simultaneous unloading and loading of trains while in motion, resulting in more efficient dispatch times averaging around 53.5 seconds per cycle. A significant hindrance in start-stop mode was the weight of the lap bar restraints, which require considerable force, around 45 pounds, to secure. Many riders struggle to lower their restraints and require assistance from ride attendants. However, the implementation of the moving station helped mitigate this issue to some extent. Despite the transition away from start-stop mode, Rockit still operated with a maximum of 4 trains, as the timing of trains between the ride's various block zones still needed to be fine-tuned. If you're a regular viewer of my channel but still not sure what a block zone is, let me help you out. A block zone is a section of ride that only one train may occupy. At the end of a block zone is a method to stop a train in case the block zone ahead is still occupied. This is the safety system that prevents roller coaster trains from colliding into one another. This is the block zone diagram of Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit. First is the station block, which can hold 2 trains. Next is the lift block. Following are all the ride segments, starting with block 1, which ends with the first mid-course brake run. Then block 2, which ends with the second mid-course brake run. Followed by block 3, which ends with the third mid-course brake run. Then block 4, which ends with the fourth mid-course brake run. Next is block 5, which is the final brake run. Then is the transfer track block, and last is the sync drive block, which spaces trains into the moving station at the correct interval. In an effort to operate Rockit with more trains, Universal began slowing trains less at each brake run to shorten the time it took for trains to traverse each block zone. In doing so, trains could more reliably run at more frequent intervals without catching up to the train ahead of it. But as braking was reduced, it became apparent that trains were hitting the ride's second brake run in block 2 too quickly, which risked frequent overspeed faults. Park technicians were often spotted standing on the second brake run's catwalk and recording each train's speed with a radar gun. To combat overspeeds, a fixed magnetic trim brake was added at the end of the first mid-course brake run before the drop into block 2. And during the hotter summer months when trains run even faster, the park adds additional magnetic trim brakes. The other 3 mid-course brake runs never received additional trim brakes and still end with 3 pinch brakes as designed. By April of 2010, Universal was able to operate Rockit with 5 trains, although not reliably. And by July of 2010, the park succeeded in operating Rockit with 6 trains on the track, which seemed to become the new maximum train count rather than 7 trains as originally noted in the ride's press release. With 6 trains on the track, the ride can still dispatch a train in as little as 23 seconds, but there are gaps between many of the trains which lead to an average dispatch time of 26.5 seconds. And a theoretical cycle count of 136 trains an hour, which yields a theoretical capacity of 1,632 riders per hour, over 200 riders shy of the original advertised capacity of 1,850 riders per hour. Now in that time period, 6 train operations was still quite rare due to various ride issues, as well as Universal entirely removing trains from the attraction to experiment with vehicle upgrades, more on that later. But a common issue with the ride's block zones is that trains can catch up to the train ahead, like in this example here, which forces this train to stop at the end of block 2 as block 3 was still occupied. For how short the ride's minimum dispatch time is, the block zones are longer than they optimally should be. With the ride speed sensitivity issues, it's quite common for a faster running train to catch up to a slower running train, forcing the faster train to stop in one of the ride's various block zones. It's also very common when a fully loaded train trails an empty train, or even when an empty train trails an empty train. It can also happen when a train that has been running for a duration of time is cycled after a train that had just been loaded with riders for the first time that day. The ride's moving station, which can hold 2 trains, is also shorter than it should be, as there isn't much buffer room at all if a train takes longer than normal to load the next group of riders. A regular load cycle continues until right before the train dispatches into the lift hill, where newer attractions at Universal with moving stations, such as Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure, and even the only slightly newer Forbidden Journey, feature ample buffer room in the load station if a ride vehicle takes longer to load. So there are many scenarios while loading trains at Rockit that require the moving station to stop, otherwise known as a station stop. The scenarios include when riders are unable to fit inside the coaster's restraints, or when an ADA rider needs to board. These situations regularly lead to station stops, which can cause trains to stack as far back as Block 4 when running 6 trains. Whereas if the ride had the space in the station to fit at least 3 trains, it would take much longer for trains to roll through the station, which would provide a better buffer time. Station stops can lead to issues in the sync drive block, which is where trains are pulsed into the moving station at the correct interval. If you recall earlier in the video where the anti-rollback pawls are locked upward into the trains, the sync drive is where the anti-rollback pawls are released back downward. Each anti-rollback pawl is released with this click here. A sensor is also present which indicates to the ride control system that each pawl was released. What can happen is when a station stop occurs, it can cause trains to stop where an anti-rollback pawl is situated right above the sensor. Then when motion is restarted, the control system won't register the pawl as released even though it is, which causes a ride fault that halts operations. It's crucial that the control system knows all anti-rollback pawls are released to verify the anti-rollback system will work properly during that train's next descent up the lift hill. In order to clear the fault, the train needs to be reversed past the pawl sensor and then advance back through it. The only problem is that this requires the coaster to be placed in manual mode, and in an effort to remain as safe as possible, Universal does not allow their attractions to be operated in manual mode when loaded with any riders. Because of this, anytime this anti-rollback pawl fault occurs, all motion on the coaster is halted as trains stack up in the ride's various block zones. Then all riders are evacuated from the coaster. Only then can the train in question be reversed and advanced through the pawl sensor to clear the error. Following this, the control system is now aware that the train can now safely ascend the lift hill after loading with new riders, even if the anti-rollback pawl was already released to begin with. Overall, it's just another reason why Rockit should have had the dual chain lift it was intended to have. Rockit's 5th brake run in Block 5, which is the final brake run, is also awkwardly designed. It is sloped much more downward than the ride's mid-course brake runs to allow trains to quickly exit it. However, this added slope can cause trains to over-travel while stopping, meaning trains will stop further down the brake run than the ride control system permits them to. This can lead to further issues when the train is released from Block 5 after over-traveling. Since the train is now further down the slope, it gains less speed when released from the brakes to travel through a set of magnetic brakes on the transfer track. Due to the placement of the tire drives on the transfer track, it can cause trains in this scenario to stop short and not reach the next set of tire drives, leaving that train stuck in place. In fact, this poorly executed brake run actually led to an alleged incident in 2013 while Rockit was operating in the rain. A train needed to stop in Block 5 as the transfer block was occupied, but managed to slip through the brake run and bump the train waiting in the transfer block. I don't believe any riders were injured, but it led to the ride not being permitted to operate in any kind of precipitation. If you've been to Florida, then you know how it rains quite often, so it's just another of the many conditions that keep Rockit closed compared to most major roller coasters. This incident may have had to do with some train upgrades that made a few of the ride vehicles heavier than the cars that hadn't been upgraded yet. More on that later. To ensure the ride doesn't operate in any kind of rain, Rockit is actually equipped with laser sensors that are pinpoint accurate at detecting the slightest precipitation. Once the system detects the slightest of rain, the ride is required to shut down. Shutting down the ride in the rain also aids another issue with the coaster. The guest interface panels on the lap bar X-Car restraints where riders choose their songs are apparently not waterproof. In fact, the panels are actually Windows phones built into the restraints. While operating in the rain, it was possible for water to seep into the phones, which would cause them to stop working. However, 2 trains allegedly bumping on the brake run, which prevented the ride from ever operating in the rain again, solved this issue. The grand opening of the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at Islands took place on June 18th, 2010, and it was met with overwhelming success. Crowds swarmed to Islands, forming a lengthy queue just to gain entry into the new land. Interestingly, when Rockit closed for quote annual maintenance in September 2010, as we'll discuss momentarily, many visitors appeared unfazed by its absence.
I had so much fun at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, it doesn't make any difference to me.
After just a year in operation, it became evident that Rockit fell short of Universal's expectations. It took nearly a year to reach its intended operating capacity, was already rough and uncomfortable, the audio in certain seats would often stop working, and the interactive music video guests could purchase didn't take off like the park had expected. Moreover, Rockit lacked a cohesive theme from day one and was already a bit cheesy even for 2009. Had the ride debuted in 1999, its theming may have been a bit cooler. And does anyone remember the Sid Vinyl character the park created to help market the ride before it opened?
Not only does it let you pick your own music, it features the biggest non-inverted loop ever. What does that mean in English? It means you're inside the loop until you get to the top, and then you whip outside before twisting back in, all at 65 miles per hour.
I met a woman who could do that once.
Additionally, for such a major roller coaster at what's supposed to be a world-class theme park, its design and presence is aesthetically unpleasing. The industrial appearance of the vertical lift and frequent brake runs detract from the skyline of both the studio's park and Islands, as it's visible even from areas like Seuss Landing. Orlando's other roller coasters with ample mid-course brake runs through their layouts are less hideous as they're almost all located indoors. In my opinion, Rockit looks like an ugly erector set, and the Universal of today would absolutely not build a roller coaster with the same poor aesthetics. Despite having a dedicated fan base, which does include myself despite what I'm saying about the ride, the consensus among visitors is that Rockit is generally rough, uncomfortable, and forgettable. On September 2nd, 2010, Maurer spiced up the mess at Rockit by issuing a recall on all its X-Car coasters that utilize tandem car trains. The recall notice revealed that during routine load testing, Maurer discovered that the coupling bar connecting the cars of each train experienced loads exceeding the calculated limits, indicating that the coupling bar and elements were not durable enough to withstand fatigue. As part of the recall, Maurer began working on a revised coupling bar, but the new design was not expected to be ready for another 2 to 3 months. In the meantime, Maurer strongly advised all parks to immediately cease operation of all tandem X-Car coasters until the coupling rods were examined using ultrasonic testing and magnetic particle inspection. Parks were instructed to conduct examinations every 3 weeks or 200 hours of operation, whichever came first. And if any irregularity was found, that ride was to be closed immediately. Interestingly, despite the recall, Rockit continued to operate without interruption. However, nearly 2 weeks later on September 15th, 2010, the coaster unexpectedly closed for undisclosed maintenance reasons. Even more intriguingly, when Universal was asked if the closure was related to Maurer's recall, they claimed to have already addressed the issue before Maurer's bulletin. Although Universal did not publicly disclose this, it was reportedly because Universal technicians were the ones who initially identified the coupling bar issue, prompting Maurer's safety recall. Apparently, in an attempt to improve Rockit's smoothness, Universal was in the process of converting the wheel assemblies on the coaster's trains to higher-end wheel assemblies inspired by what B&M uses on their trains. During this process, technicians discovered early signs of fatigue in the coupling rods. Rockit remained closed for its undisclosed maintenance issue, and on September 20th, 2010, Universal announced that since Rockit was already closed, they would also address the coaster's annual maintenance needs, extending the closure indefinitely. Speculation arose regarding the nature of the issues Universal was addressing, ranging from structural cracks in the unsupported track of the non-inverting loop to concerns with the ride's lift hill, as the elevator was often seen raised to the crest for inspections by Universal technicians. There were even rumors suggesting that Rockit's problems were severe enough for Universal to consider removing the $45 million roller coaster. Fortunately, Rockit reopened on October 27th, 2010. Despite expectations for a smoother experience due to the alleged new wheel assemblies, many riders found the coaster just as rough as before. In early 2011, speculation surfaced that Universal was exploring options to procure entirely new trains for Rockit. Reportedly, the park reached out to B&M, but B&M were unwilling to take on the project. Supposedly, Premier, Vekoma, and Intamin submitted proposals for new trains. However, Universal accepted none of these proposals. It was rumored that the Intamin proposal would have utilized the same train generation as seen on rides like Maverick at Cedar Point. During this time period, Rockit would often not have all of its trains available for use, which typically limited its capacity to a maximum of 5 trains. One train would be sidelined for annual maintenance as usual, while a second train was removed from the track to undergo experimentation for potential enhancements. Then in early 2012, a notice of commencement filed with Orange County, Florida, indicated that ride system improvements were in process for an attraction at Universal Studios Florida. The associated firm involved in the improvements was Kumbach, a company known for implementing new restraint systems, replacing track sections, and manufacturing replacement coaster trains. Now, no official confirmation was provided, but it was widely speculated that Kumbach had been hired to assist in enhancing the problematic ride vehicles of Rockit. In June 2013, Ride Vehicle 5 returned from its annual rebuild with updates aimed at improving performance. However, these upgrades significantly increased the weight of the train compared to the others which hadn't received that round of modifications. This heightened the likelihood of trains catching up to each other on the ride layout, leading to forced stops at the ride's mid-course brake runs, and was a likely contributor to the incident in 2013 when a train slipped through Block 5 and bumped a train parked in the transfer block. After some exploring of Kumbach's website, a picture of Rockit's first drop and transition into the non-inverting loop is shown where Kumbach advertises they analyze structural frames and components. Now, we can't confirm if Kumbach were involved in the train upgrades made to Rip Ride Rockit, but it does suggest that Universal did contact Kumbach to analyze Rockit's track and structure to ensure the increased weight of the ride vehicles wouldn't cause any structural issues. Following the minor collision, Rockit continued operating in solely dry weather until its next incident a few months later. On Wednesday, October 9th, 2013, an error in the ride control system halted all train motion, leaving a train stopped in the first brake run at the end of Block 1. With Block 1 occupied, the following train climbing the lift hill was stopped near the crest, leaving many riders stranded in a vertical position, making it very difficult to evacuate them. Typically, during periods of downtime, park technicians advance stop trains through the remainder of the layout. This would have allowed the train stopped in Block 1 to progress forward, enabling the halted train on the lift hill to resume its course or stop at a more accessible location for evacuation, such as the Block 1 brake run. However, in this instance, the train in Block 1 was unable to advance forward, thus trapping the train stopped on the lift hill. As discussed earlier, Rockit's speed through its brake runs can be temperamental due to a number of reasons. As part of an experiment to maintain consistent speeds, the train stopped in Block 1 was allegedly utilizing a combination of winter and summer wheels, and as the name implies, winter wheels are better suited for colder weather. However, that October day in Florida was quite hot, and the winter wheels apparently melted to some extent onto the hot track of the Block 1 brake run, leaving the train stuck in place and not allowing the stop train on the lift hill to move forward. After being stuck in the vertical position for over 2 hours, riders stranded on the lift hill needed to be evacuated. With Block 1 still occupied, park technicians manually raised the train higher up the lift until both cars were more level on the lift crest, where a catwalk was available. Firefighters then assisted in unloading riders from the stalled train. While the evacuation was successful, unloading riders from a train stopped at the crest of a lift this steep is still far from ideal. If Rockit featured the intended dual chain lift, this risky evacuation could have been avoided, as the lift chains would have been able to reverse and lower the train into the station where it could have been unloaded on level ground. To prevent the need to evacuate Rockit ever again in such a fashion, Universal installed brakes on the ride's first drop in 2017. These brakes are not active during regular operation and do not operate as trim brakes whatsoever. Their only purpose are to force trains to valley between the first drop and non-inverting loop when needed. So if the October 2013 situation were to repeat where a train stopped in block 1 but couldn't proceed forward, forcing the following train to stop on the lift hill, the train stopped on the lift hill is now able to be released into the first drop thanks to the new brakes, even with the train ahead still stopped in the block 1 brake run. The brakes bring the train to a stop on level track as there are even brakes at the bottom of the valley, and from this location it is much easier to evacuate riders with the mobile stairs. This system has only been needed a few times since its inception, such as during the situation in 2019, and seems to be featured on the news anytime it is utilized. Overall, it's a system that shouldn't have to exist had Rockit been built with the dual chain lift as intended. But once again, Universal have remained as vigilant as it gets when it comes to taming their problematic roller coaster. The park is so on top of things that alongside forcing trains to valley a few times a year at the first brake run, park technicians also test the first drop brakes a few times a year to ensure the brakes are working properly, to ensure that park personnel are trained on how to evacuate riders in this situation, and to practice recovering the ride by removing the stalled train's upstop wheels and craning the ride vehicle off the track. Now, even with all its issues, this doesn't mean Rockit hasn't had its golden years, which occurred between about 2013 to 2018, when the ride regularly ran at full capacity with all 6 trains. But after years of successful 6-train operations, which took a long time to reliably achieve, Rip Ride Rockit would woefully reduce to 5-train operations in January of 2019. In an effort to continuously improve the coaster's performance, the Universal Engineering Department borrowed one of the ride's 7 trains to perform an engineering experiment and explore various design upgrades. Like we discussed previously, in order to run 6 trains, Rockit needs 7 trains available, as 1 train at a time is removed from the track to undergo its annual refurbishment. But with just 6 trains available, only 5 could operate at a time while 1 train went through its refurbishment. The engineering experiment would continue all the way until 2022, at which point Rockit's 7th train was returned to service, which should have allowed for 6-train operations to return. However, the ride's lift hill had actually been slowed down at the crest, which increased the overall cycle time for trains to climb the lift and drop into block 1. Subsequently, this lengthened the ride's minimum dispatch time from 23 seconds to 27 seconds, making 6-train operations unnecessary. With 5-train operations, the moving station runs at the same speed as with 6-train operations, but the sync drive block ensures a larger gap between trains entering the station. All in all, with 5-train operations, Rockit is able to dispatch at most 112 trains an hour, with the dispatch about every 32 seconds, yielding a theoretical capacity of 1,344 riders per hour. As to why the lift hill was slowed down, that was in an effort to reduce a growing number of reported minor injuries that guests were sustaining on the first drop. The idea was that by slowing the lift hill before the first drop, it would give guests more time to brace themselves. Allegedly, this was quite helpful, and all reports of minor injuries sustained on the first drop seemed to stop. The lift hill was also allegedly slowed down to reduce the likelihood of trains entering the block 1 brake too quickly, which, as we discussed, caused overspeed faults that shut down the ride. And apparently this has worked, and the ride sees a reduced number of overspeed faults in the first brake run. But because of the need to slow down the lift hill, Rockit will most likely never operate with more than 5 trains on the track ever again. And even with all the quirks, flaws, and problems I've mentioned so far, there's still a number of other issues the coaster has faced over the years. For over a year, one of the seats in the 3rd row of all trains was closed off from riders. This allegedly had to do with a potential clearance envelope issue in which taller riders could violate, leading to potential injuries when stretching their arms or legs out. This issue occurred after the reduction of the ride's operations to 5 trains at most. So now with 1 less train on the track, Rockit was also down to 11 out of 12 seats on each train. After over a year of research and analysis, it was determined that the potential issue wasn't actually a threat and the seat was reopened for all riders. Regardless of the number of available seats, Rockit has suffered faults that occur in the ride's moving station ever since continuous unloading and loading of riders was put into place. Maurer split the station into several zones in which the lap bar restraints can be unlocked and relocked. If the attendants on the ride platform call for the main operator or controls to unlock restraints, the operator must power the correct zone to unlock restraints. And in this situation, I don't mean when the train pulls into the moving station and restraints unlock automatically. I mean later on in the station track. But what can happen is if a zone is energized while the train transitions into another zone, it can cause a ride fault that shuts down the coaster. Thus, Rockit commonly suffers errors in the station while attempting to unlock restraints a second time. Rockit's trains also feature a perplexing method of redundancy to keep all lap bar restraints locked and secure. On most major roller coasters, you'll either find a mechanical ratcheting mechanism or a hydraulic mechanism to lock restraints. For redundancy, each restraint will either feature 2 mechanical ratcheting locks or 2 hydraulic cylinders. But I guess in an effort to make Rockit more troubling to maintain, each restraint on Rockit is locked by both a hydraulic cylinder and mechanical ratcheting system. This adds unnecessary complexity to the trains, and means the park needs to maintain and keep a part supply for 2 different locking systems instead of just one like with most major roller coasters. Now I do have to hand it to Universal for keeping Rockit operating as reliably as it does, even with its plethora of design and engineering setbacks. Maurer truly did not deliver a roller coaster that was ready to reliably operate at peak capacity 365 days a year. Maybe if the ride were located at a much less busy regional amusement park and only operated for about half the year, it would have fared much better. But without question, Universal have done the absolute best they possibly could with Rockit, and I commend them for that. However, these efforts to keep the problematic attraction operating as reliably as possible have come at a steep price. In fact, Rockit is actually the most expensive attraction to operate at Universal Studios Florida, even more so than the other more complicated dark rides at the park, which rely on a large number of special effects. Allegedly, Universal's efforts to keep Rockit operating as reliably as possible have led to them paying for the ride 6 times over. If the ride's price tag of $45 million is true, this would mean Universal has spent more than $270 million on a roller coaster they wish they never bought. That insane dollar amount is a result of the rigorous maintenance required to keep Rockit operating, the multitude of design and engineering experiments done over the years to find solutions, and the application of those findings through various upgrades and enhancements made to the attraction. And even with all the money Universal has spent on the ride, I hear the ride's days are numbered as the park is in the process of planning a new roller coaster to replace it. As to when Rockit's time will come to an end, that is a bit uncertain, but what I can say is that if you're a fan of the ride like I am, you might want to ride it sooner than later to be safe. As to what ride would replace Rockit, perhaps we'll see something along the lines of a spinning multi-launch roller coaster from Intamin, just like the new Fast and Furious Drift coaster coming to Universal Studios Hollywood in California. But that's just my own speculation. Now I'd guess a majority of you are not itching for a re-ride on Rockit. Jerry and Clem is definitely in that group, as she's actually filing a lawsuit against the Universal Orlando Resort over her horrific experience on Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit on February 11th, 2023. Clem described the ride as being thrown side to side really hard and violently, which perfectly describes several of my rides on Rip Ride Rockit, although I've never suffered from severe long-term effects like Clem has. She allegedly got off the ride and couldn't read any signs and couldn't remember her family members' names. Clem later went to the hospital in March 2023, where doctors identified a head injury and bleeding in her brain. This led to Clem filing a lawsuit against Universal, stating that the park failed to warn her that her head would be shaken and slammed against the headrest of her seat while aboard Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit. Now, had she been a roller coaster enthusiast who watched nerdy videos like this one, she may have found out sooner. I wish Clem and her family all the best. All in all, Rockit has proved to be a lot more trouble than it was worth. If the amount of money that Universal has spent on the ride is true, this means Rockit has cost the park nearly as much as the $300 million Hagrid's Magical Creatures motorbike adventure, and Hagrid's is a far more successful coaster in terms of popularity and probably reliability. Had Universal waited to build Project Rumble at a later date and went with a simple B&M hypercoaster, that version of Rip Ride Rockit would have certainly been much more successful with guests as well as for Universal's wallet. Now, even with everything I've said, I still wouldn't say that Rockit is an absolutely terrible ride, but it would serve smaller regional amusement parks much much better. It just wasn't designed and engineered well enough to handle the heightened demand from a park like Universal Studios Florida. Thankfully, Universal has done a phenomenal job in getting the ride reliable enough for their standards, and the ride still attracts a decent crowd. So that will do it for this episode of Problematic Roller Coasters covering the infamous Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something new. Be sure to comment below your thoughts on Rip Ride Rockit and your experience with the coaster. If you found the video worthwhile, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this, and be sure to like the video to help in our continuous fight against the YouTube algorithm. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.